Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
And we're going to have our podcast notes for you. Always reach out to us at ittasteslikeburningcast@gmail.com. You can find us at Twitter at ITLBcast. You can find us on the subreddit of ITLBcast. And you can also find us on Patreon if you're feeling pretty spicy. And give us a support there. And we can shoot some fantabulous stickers over to you.
And look for extra content. We put some extra content up on there. We'll do that periodically. Not going to set a schedule for that, but periodically as we have something that goes along with another deal, we'll stick it over there.
Right.
Just so people can see it.
Yeah, our last podcast, and I don't know what sequence this will all be released in, but our last podcast, we had a couple come in that joined our department, and it turned out to be kind of a longer podcast, so we broke it down into being a two-part thing. One's on where you'd regularly find it, and the second half of that is on Patreon, and ultimately we'll load round 2 over on Apple or everything else. But we're just trying to toss some extra content onto Patreon and basically bribe you into getting stickers.
Yeah. And it's that particular upload on Patreon is kind of the trailer. It's free to listen to, so you don't have to join to listen to that one, but look for some of those future ones to be tied to that membership.
Yeah, as we progress, and we're growing nice and slow, and by 2075, we'll probably have maybe more than 12 listeners. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Actually, we're actually shockingly slowly but surely progressing very evenly. And one of the things that I know where we're reaching out is that when we get emails, we appreciate it when people reach out to us and we can fire thoughts and ideas and concerns and comments to them. And one of our emails that we recently got, we ended up sitting down and meeting with this guy. He's in a county kind of close to us. And the particular podcast that he had listened to was about recruiting again. And when he reached out to us, he was just kind of breaking down some general questions and ideas and comments and concerns. So the basic concept on this is that you have a county, they have a relatively freshly formed ESD here in Texas, and their population's between 15 and 30,000, and they have 9 to 15 people on staff. I can't remember the exact number. And they have approximately 30 volunteers. And they have a small community college or trade school that's there in town. And the board is trying to consider other alternatives to figuring out how to entice the volunteers to participate some more. And one of their grand schemes was to start a compensation program for the volunteers. So that's generally what we're going to bounce around on. Is it's going to be an ESD focused question and how to try and get the volunteers to participate more with the ESD and their response. But also, I'll try my best to argue kind of the benefits of considering compensation.
I won't.
And the problem is that I'm going to tell you right now, if you want to kill your volunteer organization, start an hourly rate. Start a reimbursement where they get paid per shift. Start a program where there's a subsidy that goes in and actually pays people to cover shifts. I emphatically believe you don't pay volunteers to be at the station. That doesn't mean that you don't compensate them somehow or figure out another way to reward them for their time, energy, and effort. But I'm telling you, you strike at the heart of creating a huge problem and opening Pandora's box the second that you do a compensated volunteer program. At least that's my opinion. But I'm going to try and do my best to argue in favor of it.
Yeah, and to be totally fair, I've been part of a combination department with a limited compensation program for a handful of volunteers. I've seen it in action. I've seen things that have worked with it. I've seen things that just were abysmal failures with it. I've seen neighboring departments and departments that I'm familiar with just totally destroy themselves with this stuff. And it's a tightrope thing, right? You're walking that tightrope of where does the line draw, and when are you no longer a volunteer, and are you just skirting rules and statutes that are in place to keep the title of volunteer, but you're essentially becoming a full paid fire department.
Right.
And I think that's where it goes. And I think the combination aspect of it, man, that's juggling a herd of cats.
Well, the one thing that drives me nuts, particularly here in Texas, and this is the exact same scenario, and this department in Texas is doing the exact same thing, is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And the fact of the matter is what they're trying to duck under is all the TCFP, Texas Commission of Fire Protection, requirements and standards that are placed upon municipalities, counties, when you have a career fire department. Okay? Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole in arguing what I think of TCFP. The fact of the matter is that TCFP exists. It establishes a safety standard and a general outline at how to run your career fire department. And what these departments in Texas have figured out how to try and do, very few of them successfully, I'll add, but what they're doing is they're trying to have a career fire department without the career staff. And I'm kind of a union guy. And this is a great way to get non-union members. This is a great way to pay people pennies on the dollar. And this is a great way to completely circumvent the entire requirements of TCFP while trying to do your best to give the facade and the complete, absolute fake stance that you have adequate career fire protection.
Yeah, staffed.
Let's
just call it staffed fire protection because it's not like we've talked about how diverse our organization is and how there's so many different people that are at different levels of training, their different backgrounds. It's just any solid volunteer fire department is going to have people from the end of the spectrum of the brand new person that literally knows nothing that showed up yesterday to the person that has been there for 30 or 40 years and let's just argue that they know everything, right? So you're somewhere in that range. And there are standards, and there's standards that we try to achieve and that we work towards, but we keep a whole pile of people that are down there in that new range all the time. So if you're going to compensate people, how do you compensate somebody that knows nothing? Right? So that's one problem with that whole scenario. So you're either going to let them do it or you're not going to let them do it. And if you don't let them do it, how do you expect them to move up to the level where they can do it? And if you don't provide the resources to get them to that level where they can do it, how do you ever recruit new people?
Right. And then the other compounding factor on what you're talking about is that the reason that you have a combination department is because whatever the entity is won't just go out and hire the amount of people that you adequately need to cover your district. Now, let's be realistic. That is kind of the whole purpose of an ESD, is to start somewhere.
Right.
Okay. And when you're starting and that's the sad thing to me, is that it's the beginning of the end.
Right.
Okay. So what you're basically doing is you're throwing in the towel, you're screaming, "Uncle, no mas," and you're saying, "Well, we're only going to half-ass this. So we actually need 40, but we're going to hire 9. In the meantime, we got to figure out how to supplement those 9.
Yeah, or how to extort labor out of some folks.
Right. Okay. So in this given scenario, what I'll be is that theoretical board member that's arguing in the position of why I want to compensate my volunteers. And Jesse, I'll have you just kind of be we'll say the assistant chief or chief of the volunteers arguing why it's a bad idea. Okay. So right out of the gate, the easiest way to answer this is that I know that my staffing a 9 or 15, so 3 or 5 on shift. So we'll pretend I have 2 stations, and we'll just say it's 15. And that I've got 3 and 2. Okay. 2 on a box and 3 on an engine. All right. But my call volume is in that 10,000 calls a year range, 80% medical. Okay. So really what's getting whacked is medical side. Okay. And I'll take the low-hanging fruit on this. I need to be able to support my guys that are on staff with your volunteers for the calls that we're currently having. And I really appreciate your volunteers, but I'm not quite getting the response out of the volunteers, particularly on the bigger calls where I really need them. And I'd like to go ahead and just, at least compensate them, get them in here for a shift, and we'll cover, let's say, 2 people per shift, 2 extra volunteers. So that brings us up to 7. Okay. And I'll pay them $125 an hour, $125 a day for a 24-hour shift. They can cover minimum 2 shifts a month, maximum 4. What do you think?
Well, the problem is most of my volunteers make way more than $125 a day. So it's almost insulting to them, and you're telling them to continue to do this, that they've got to take a pay cut. That's problem number 1.
Well, okay, so that's what I have for the year. Okay, next year we can maybe budget a little more accordingly. And what's a number that we need to get to for what you would consider adequate compensation for the day?
Well, Larry's a doctor.
Would he have any other non-doctors on the department?
Well, yeah. We've got an engineer. We've got a machinist. He makes about $40 or $50 an hour. So, and there's some young guys that work fast food, and it's probably appealing to them, but they have no real training or they're early in their training stages.
So I need to be around, what do you say, $20 an hour?
Yeah, I mean that's getting close, I think. And I think that's where we're on different pages. These people are not doing this for money. They're not here to make money. It's not about the money. Larry the doctor doesn't need the money to come fight a fire.
Well, if it wasn't about the money, why weren't they responding before?
Well, that's a real onion onion layered scenario, right? Some of them, the current paid staff doesn't really treat them well when they do come around.
Well, that's easily fixable. I can just go to the chief and tell him to make sure that the volunteers are taken care of.
Yeah, and I would suggest you do that, but it's a little late for some of that. They're they get canceled a lot.
What do you mean?
So a call comes out, and instead of them making scene, the paid staff, the current paid staff, will cancel them before they get there. So they're making an effort to go to stuff, but they're getting canceled before they can ever get there.
Yeah, but doesn't that work out in their benefit because then they can just get back to work?
Well, they've already screwed up work at that point. So are they going to go to the next call because they just got canceled to the last one?
I would have no clue about that.
Yeah, that's where we run into problems. The funny thing about a volunteer, the more you depend on them and the more responsibility you give them, and the more that they see value in what they're doing, the more they do it. And that's a universal factual thing.
So how do we incorporate our volunteers into our current dynamic under the pretext of more responsibility, more tasks? Realistically or theoretically, the more they're going to perform.
So my answer is you get rid of your paid staff, but that's not always the popular answer. But the biggest thing is they've got to be included. They got to have ownership. They've got to feel like they're somewhat in control of their destiny here. They're helping make the decisions that shape the future of the department.
Now, I'm going to go out on a theoretical limb because no board member would ever offer this, but I've kind of thought about this for a little while. And if I was in this position, might be something I'd consider. And this would be a hell of a hook to throw at your volunteers. So, Chief Jesse, what if we looked at, actually, let me rephrase that. I've actually talked to our recent HR personnel in the county, and I've been working on this side benefit program. How many of your volunteers are struggling paying for health insurance?
There's several.
What if we had, just theoretically, some sort of volunteer health insurance program? And I'll even sweeten the pot. It's them and 50% for their family. We'll cover their insurance for 4 shifts a month.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Now, the cost on this, on my end, is about, for a single guy, 20. He's cheap. But that classic 40-year-old, 2.5 family, they're going to cost me around $2,000 a month. I need more than just the 4 calls a month. 4 shifts a month. Working under that pretext, I need 4 shifts a month out of them, but I need some more. I need them to participate in some more training, and ultimately the goal is to lead, guide, and direct them into shift work. Certifications into their shifts. Realistically, what I'm trying to do is truly corner our young guys on our department and get them in the foot in the door for when we eventually continue to grow, build, and develop this organization, quite frankly, fully staffed. I have people to immediately hire from.
Yeah, and I think that, and break character a little bit, I think you're getting into the realm of something that makes more sense, right?
Right.
So it's a tangible thing, yes, and it's a benefit. And for us, our benefit at our department is a pension. right?
Right.
So you get into those things where it's a compensation, it's a reward, but it's not a reward that's a throwaway award. Like $125 a shift, that's a throwaway thing for a large percentage of, nobody's paying their rent off their volunteer fire department shifts.
Right.
So it really doesn't mean anything. And for the ones that are doing it because they have to have the money, that's why they're doing it.
Right. Well, and I'm going to smash this because this is one of the most stupid things that you can be encouraging that classic young man or woman that's living at your department at an ESD that compensates. Okay, if $125 a day is not a full paycheck in the area and they're not working the classic 8 days a week, then how the hell can you morally or ethically sit there and say that this is some sort of compensation program that's a benefit to people? Because at the end of the day, that individual realistically is only working 2 or 3 shifts a week. So that's $350. Well, I'm familiar enough with this area. The $350 a week don't cut it.
Yeah, that doesn't even get you to a livable
wage.
Okay.
And what you're doing is that you're taking full advantage of that individual by the fact that they're young, they're naive, and they got the fire bug. Okay. And they're excited to run these fire calls. And what you're doing is you're making the damn person broke by taking full advantage of the fact that they're going to sign up and cover all these extra shifts for you. Here's the kicker on that, and the backside of this consequence. They get burned out because they're a compensated volunteer, and they're not liked by the career staff. And they don't want to be around, the career guys don't want to be around the volunteers. They can't stand them. That's facts. I don't give a crap what anyone says about that. That is biblical truth. Look in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 3. It's in there. Volunteer and career hate each other. Particularly the career guys hate volunteer. It's just a fact. You can sit there and try and butter that as much as you want. I'll argue with you tooth and nail. There's just no way you make that work.
Yeah. My analogy of juggling a herd of cats is and I did that job. So understand, that's where I was. I was in a combination department. I was the chief of the volunteers. So it was, instead of being able to focus my time, energy, and effort on bolstering my part of that department, my time was spent literally keeping them from killing each other.
Right. And having different versions of insurrections and how to get back and revenge and plotting and scheming.
And all the other bullshit that went with it. That's what it is. And, it's a very tricky situation. It's hard to manage. I would argue that if you don't have the exact right, perfect person in those leadership roles, it's impossible.
I think for me, we'll just blow this whole scenario out of the water.
Yeah.
Just go to free discussion and just truly express our bias. Here's my biggest problem with it. At the end of the day, by compensating your volunteers by being there daily, you are attacking the heart and soul of what a volunteer is. And this goes against everything that particularly me and you believe, okay? But at the end of the day, the essence of what a volunteer is, the fact of the matter is that people have personal reasons at why they volunteer. And when you go in and you start stripping that away, and you take away that individual's moral, social, ethical, peer pressure reasons for volunteering, and you take away their enjoyment of doing X, Y, and Z, and now they're being compensated for it. It's not volunteering, it's paid work, and they're not going to put up with the shenanigans, the drama, the dogma, the being talked down to, the conflict of interest, or just quite frankly, the personal differences if they're being paid to be there. Because they're being paid so little to be there that it's not worth it.
Well, at that point, you're an oppressor.
Right.
Yeah, you're not doing something to benefit those individuals. You're an oppressor. You're oppressing those individuals to your gain. Period.
Right. Now, does this mean that Jesse's adamantly opposed against a form of compensation or rewarding the volunteers for their service?
Absolutely not.
Same for me. Okay. So, to me, a really damn good idea. I mean, if you really want to step out on the limb and you really, really want to go out there and reward your volunteers, have a health insurance program, a legitimate working health insurance program.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pensions, health insurance,
Right.
Water bills, utility savings, tax abatement. The list is endless of those things that have tangible value, that are saying thank you, that are increasing participation, that are a secondary benefit, right?
Right.
So if it's the primary benefit, and that's the best way I can describe it, if you're using it as income and it's the primary benefit, and we know it's not enough income to live on, so it's just not there. The number of people that it takes to make that work, so that you've got enough diversity in schedules that you can cover every day, that you've got enough people to have the shifts covered to where it's not a burden or a burdensome deal. You're getting into the hundreds of volunteers that are required, and frankly, most departments suck at recruiting. So most of them can never get to the hundreds of members that it takes to do that.
Right. And let's go down the rabbit hole for just a half a second on that. Our buddy and our ESD to the around us here. So, okay, let's just say that you magically create the most wonderful retention program on the face of the earth. Okay? Screw it. We'll go expensive and say that if you have a ridiculously good health insurance program, a phenomenal pension, if those career guys and those volunteers can't work together and they have this loathing, dastardly hate of each other, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And how the hell are you going to recruit if all of your volunteers, particularly your former volunteers, turn around and say, this place is a disaster? There's nothing to be done with this. Yeah, they've got these benefits and stuff, but the amount of crap that you have to deal with going through the organization's terrible. The organization's fundamentally mismanaged from a combination point of view. It's not going to work.
And I think where things go off the rails a lot of times in these scenarios is you take a career fire chief who has spent a lifetime in a career department and has never been a volunteer, never been part of a volunteer organization, and that's your head of department. Their views are so skewed to the career side to begin with that they truly do not have an understanding of the volunteer fire service.
Right. Or here's the one thing I'm going to add to that. Because volunteer departments sometimes do a bad job of representing themselves. Okay. And what I mean by this is even though they're trying really hard, they're just part of I'm going to call it a weak organization. Maybe they're lacking on training or guidance or direction. And so if you're a career guy and all of your experience and reference is to weaker organizations around you, well, yeah, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow, particularly if you're having to work with them, and even to the extent of where they're dangerous, definitely unsafe. Bare minimum, they're just kind of lost on scene, you know? So, but that's a double-edged sword. You're the one that works with them. Do you not have a responsibility for your own safety? How does it not benefit you to make them stronger? I mean, you can split that 14 different ways, and you need to be careful just hammering the volunteers that you're theoretically working with if you're oddly enough the one contributing to making the problem worse.
But it's and I'll give that guy a little bit of a reprieve on some of that, because we're creatures of habit, right? We do what we've always done or what we always know, and
and because that's easiest.
That's easiest, correct. And it's that tradition impeding progress thing. If that's all you know and that's what's easy for you to do and that's the easiest solution that you can come up with, that's what you're going to do. Nobody wants to take the hard struggle road of figuring out a new system and a new scenario with new. Frankly, it's a different thing to pay somebody and tell them this is your job and go do it than it is we're literally asking these people to do things that a normal person wouldn't want to do. Right? We're asking them to go to calls that are not super awesome to be at. We're asking them to go see the blood and guts. We're asking them to go into the burning building, and the average person walking down the street frankly doesn't want any part of that.
Right. You know, I kind of like the direction you're going with that. So there's you need to really dissect about 15 different parts of what Jesse just said there to truly understand theoretically how to tackle this combination department ideology. And it goes back to the root of the question of compensating the volunteers. So I would argue generally across the United States that the fire service is basically the same. A call comes in, people go to someone else's call for help. You come back, you put the truck in service, and you wait for the next one. The problem is that there's such a wide variety of what's considered the classic call-in service in that area. So even though the fire service gets a blanket coverage on what is the fire service, the particular needs to the organization, it's unique. It's specific.
It's different, yes.
And at the end of the day, the type of people that are going to be able to work perfectly or best or be the best fit for that organization is unique and specific to that area. Why are you using an ESD structure out of North Carolina or California or Oregon or Florida or Alabama?
Or a city with 250,000 people.
Right. Or a city of 3,000 people in your area. I think the problem with this is that, well, I've heard this department does this. Their chief and their board of directors says it kind of works, so we're going to try it. And you haven't even actually sat down to discuss what the tentative options are. You might be in an ESD that has a crap load of money. There's ESDs out there that have more money than they can shake a stick at. There's other ESDs that do it because it's so tight This is the only way to barely pull the purse strings to get anything in there. I get it. But the fact of the matter is those two ESDs, even though they have the same call for service function, behave and are managed completely different. Why are you taking a universal of opinion of saying, well, we're going to fix this by just paying the volunteers? Have you actually talked to the volunteers? What are they interested in? What do they need? You're talking about creating an incentive program. What would actually incentivize them? What would actually pull them in? What would actually be retention? And Jesse kind of talked about this earlier. Just to reference us, we have a pension. It's through the state of Texas. It's not Uncle Nick Nack's bait and tackle shop and fire department retirement program. It's through the state. It's TESRS, Texas Emergency Responders.
Emergency Services Retirement System.
Yes, that. We're lucky. It's taken a long time, but our pension's way up there. We're not the top of the state, but we're in the top of the state. Took a long time to get there. About probably, at least 30 years. That's minimum. Yeah. Probably realistically closer to 35 or 40. When it first started, it was 25. We're not at 25 anymore. And just for people that are out of Texas, the pension works on partial vestment at 10 years. You're fully vested at 15 years. You're eligible for your first check at the age of 55. And any year over 15 years is compounding 7% interest. So if you were that theoretical 18-year-old kid that joined our organization and remained with us until he was 55, 55, I think the math is 37 years on that pension, or is it 27? Doesn't matter. It's a big check because they had their 15 years of base pay, and then they literally had 20 years of compounding interest.
Yeah, and at that point, it's we're not talking that we're trying to get to a Social Security level with this. We're talking about you're getting to a full-on
retirement check
of multiples of thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah, that 18-year-old kid's $4,200 a month right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and our pension's still increasing every year. Now, I'm not going to go into the further breakdown of it, but that's a retention program.
Yes.
That's a retention program. Now, maybe you're in a state that doesn't have a dedicated fire retirement system for volunteers, or they're not eligible for it. Or I can guarantee your county does.
Or you're at a city that, like where I came from, where the amount that was paid into it was so minuscule that it wasn't truly a benefit, right?
Right.
So it's got to be real. It's got to be a real number. It can't just be, if I give you 40 years, I'm going to get $100 a month at the end of it.
Right.
And I think that's part of some of those misconceptions. You can pat yourself on the back real good if you're the city council that votes to do that. We're helping them out. We're giving them something. They're all going to retire with 75 cents. Yeah, no, that's not. You didn't do anything.
Yeah, you've literally. They would have been better off taking a part-time job and just intentionally sacking away every nickel from that part-time job.
And not volunteered
for you. And they'd have been hundreds of thousands of dollars ahead. Here's another one, particularly because this town that we know of, it has a college in it. It's small, but you have a college. Now, this particular town isn't considering this that I know of, but I know of another volunteer department in Texas that also has a college in it. And to be eligible for the college students to be on the department, sorry, I said that wrong. The college students on the department are eligible for free room. They live at the fire stations, and they have to make X amount of calls per month.
Okay. And complete their training.
That is an incentive program. That is how you do that. Now, how big of a difference does it make to those young men and women? Well, that's thousands of dollars per semester. Okay. Here's the other benefit of that.
They're doing something productive.
Right.
They're learning the value of community service. Some of those students are going to go on to some career in whatever that has nothing to do with the fire service. But the fact that they learned the value of community service, they're going to re-volunteer somewhere else.
Right, that's the kicker.
They're going to volunteer for United Way, whatever, any of these other
No, it'll be another department.
Or
and
another
you're 100% correct about that. And let's go down the rabbit hole for just a second about that, because this is an argument I have with the city all the time. We have the potential, and I argue the responsibility, of a completely different form of community service that goes completely unrecognized, particularly our organization. And we take young men and women into our organization. We provide them training, structure, mentorship, and references to the DFW area. And they leapfrog into their professional careers, into the fire service or EMS, into the DFW area. And they're gone. They move away. How is that not a benefit to the community? How is that not one of the ultimate forms of community service? You should advertise that. That should be a feather that you put in your cap. You are taking the next generation and you are preparing them for the next step.
And you're instilling values in them.
That are core tenets of being a good individual.
Right.
Take care of your friends. Take care of your neighbors. Take care of your community. Oh my God, that sounds terrible. Jesus, what are you doing wrong? I mean, and the kicker is, with all of this, is we've barely scratched the surface on what the potential is for your ability to actually compensate your volunteers accordingly.
And we ride a wave of notoriety, right? Because we're known to be this stepping stone, and we embrace it. We're not mad because somebody's only going to be here a year, or we'll let the college student that's off on the summer come volunteer on the summer.
Right.
We'll do these things, and we have neighboring departments around us that are doing the compensated thing, and they're still, despite paying people an unlivable wage, they struggle to staff and struggle to have people. And the people that they do have are not coming there for that major call.
Right.
They're going to their home department. They're going to the major call at our department, because we have people that volunteer at other departments that are compensating, that are members of our department. They're still coming to our calls. They're still doing what we do because of the environment of the department, the benefits of the department, the notoriety of our department, the basic clout of being a member of our department.
Yeah, we're lucky on that front. And that's not something that I've personally done.
I don't think it's luck. See, I don't think it's a lucky thing, and I don't think it's an omniscient design, but I think it's a realization of that this is happening, and we should foster some of these things instead of just shutting it down and destroying it.
Right. So, I almost said our name. Our community.
Gravy Train.
Yeah, Gravy Train. Granny, our community, it comes down to this. The fact of the matter is our forefathers a long time ago made a decision to be better. And I know that sounds cliche and kind of, cartoonish, but they did. And you fast forward 50 years, and every chief in the last 50 years, and the membership has basically embraced that. And that carried over into the city and the county. And whether anyone likes it or not, our organization is better. And there's untold hundreds of thousands of hours of time, energy, dedication, discussions just like this, not necessarily in a podcast, but at 2:00 in the morning at the station at the table. And what it's transformed into is this really unique thing that the membership today still embraces. And they hold very dear to their heart. And yeah, it's a personality thing. Okay, maybe it's an ego thing too. Arrogance? Yeah, it is. Sorry. I'm sorry I have more money than you. I'm sorry that we have better training standards than you. You can do the same though. I'll show you how to do it. I can open it up and give you examples for the last 50 years at where to start. And I can give you all the shortcuts so it doesn't take you 50 years.
And I think that's the most important piece of that whole thing, is that there was people in the past, the present, and the future that are willing to give up the amount of time and effort that it takes to be at that next level, to be better.
And to compound what you're talking about, our membership, when they have these discussions at the round table at the station, they're not talking about how to get compensated. They're talking about how to add to the pension. They're talking about how to even take training further. They're talking about how to create staffing. That's the problems I'm dealing with. Those are definitely white people problems. Those are definitely
first
world problems where I have a volunteer membership that's talking about how to increase their pension and these are 20-year-old men.
And how to increase membership.
And how to create staffing. They've embraced it. Now, maybe the Kool-Aid I'm pouring's a little strong. Maybe I'm overselling it just a bit. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that the membership's engaged with it. And these are the discussions that our organization is having. Not, well, hell, when the hell are we going to get people? How are we going to find someone else? I wish old Ricky Bobby'd come back because at least he'd do something. Yeah. These aren't the discussions that we have.
And part of that is you've got to accept and look to what the value of each individual member is, and it's not the same.
Right.
So Ricky Bobby has value, and he's excellent at this. He takes pride in this. He wants to do. All the trucks are always clean. And Billy Bo Jim Bob over there makes 90% of the calls. Those people have equal value. It's just different things that they're doing.
Right.
And so you've got to realize that standard of what is valuable to the department is not just this written thing across the board. Like there's minimums, and the minimums are truly minimal. But the people that excel and do are the ones that are out there figuring out their niche and doing that. And I'm going to break off into this other thing that you're broke, you don't have money, nobody wants to blah blah blah. If you've got 10 members on your department, those 10 people all know somebody
Right.
that they can entice into at least showing up once, right? I doubt you have that one member that everybody he knows is a convicted felon.
This is my brother Daryl, and this is my other brother Daryl.
Right. So you've got all these people, and they know somebody. And if all 10 of them know somebody, and 2 of them actually come to be members, that's a 20% increase in your membership.
Right. Yeah. To go down that rabbit hole for just a second, I'm sorry. I know the struggle is real for volunteers and recruiting and retention and trying to have enough people for calls. But we have a department that's just north of us, and it's in our county. And I would almost argue that they're kind of the unsung heroes. No one's ever heard of them. No one would unless you worked with them directly. And somehow or another, this little itty bitty organization when I say broke, I'm talking poor as a church mouse. Okay. They have no money, and they had no money for a really long time. But it's this really strong organization. Now, they always need people. That's a given. But the fact of the matter is that if you called them for help, they'd show up in the steam fire engine and the horse-drawn hose wagon, and their people go to work. And you may not be the biggest help on the face of the earth at the end of the day, but they sure as hell showed up and worked. So what you do is you turn around, you grab a hold of that organization, and you start training their people so that you can start building this working relationship, and that you get this commonality between your 2 organizations. Well, all of a sudden, now the 2 organizations actually like each other, and they work together. That in itself makes a huge benefit, because they know that if you tone them for help, they're going to come in and actually do the Lord's work, because they know that you're giving them the opportunity to do it. How hard is it to show the classic affection, the appreciation? Thank you. You guys did a fantastic job. That's all you had to do. So just by bolstering the relationships with the neighboring departments gives you the ability to turn around and supplement the potential of having low membership by just having strong mutual aid relationships. That's not giving you the excuse to not continue to build your recruitment and figure out how to reach out and get more people involved in the organization. But that's a big part of this. Volunteerism works off of mutual aid. That's the kicker.
Yeah. And if you're that compensating department that's got 1, 2, 3, 5 people on a shift, and you're hanging your hat on that we're adequately staffed, you're literally living in denial.
Period.
Like it's just so far out of the ram. If you're not making the back end of that to where you've got 10 or 15 or 20 people showing up to a structure fire in your district, that maybe they don't all make scene every time. Maybe you don't need all those trucks there. Maybe, 5 or 7 of them make scene, but you have a response out of the woodwork of 20 people. You have the ability to actually handle a scene with enough personnel to do a job. You're
Right.
not just saving a slab.
Every single department out there has a need for mutual aid. I don't know, we're kind of bird dogging here for a second, but it's worth stating.
It just all goes in the circle, right?
So a couple of years ago, we had a very large industrial fire. All said and done, 6 counties, 14 agencies, 225 people. Volunteer. Actually, oddly enough, a handful of paid departments in there also. That's not possible without a decent relationship. Now, the kicker on that is you got to pay that on forward. Eventually, you're going to get called to their district, and you need to get people up there. And it's not one or two. Well, assuming that they didn't just ask for a tanker from you.
Right.
They're asking for an engine. It's not one or two people. You need to really figure out, even if you have a little bit of a delayed response, get an engine up there. That 3, that 4, preferably 5 or 6. So that in your time of need, that other department sends you 6 also with an engine. And it does. I mean, it's all, like Jesse said, it's all directly connected. And to kind of bring this discussion back to center, I fully embrace the idea of taking care of your volunteers, but understand that in what you consider as taking care of your volunteers has the full potential to be the first coffin nail, because you're not actually considering what the power of being volunteer is and what a volunteer department can actually give you. And when you get the volunteers to commit, my favorite quote of all time is the difference between commitment and involvement is like a ham and eggs breakfast. The pig was committed and the chicken was involved. You need commitment. Volunteers will commit. I've seen it in our area. And it's not just our organization. We have 3 departments around us. Their volunteers are committed. They don't get paid. Hell, they don't even have a pension. But they're committed. Why? Because they've embraced the concept of volunteerism. And they take pride in their organization. And they take ownership in their organization. And the benefits are exponential.
And that's one thing to bring back into it. And then there's very famous fire chief, very nice, well-written, famous book about pride and ownership. And that book is written towards the paid fire service. But the things that are in there about taking ownership of your department and taking ownership of your organization and your equipment and tools and all those things are 100% applicable. And I would argue that it's easier to get volunteers to take ownership of it than it is the paid staff. And that's just experience speaking there. And you can capitalize off of that pride and ownership and have a very strong, successful department. And that's my shout out to Rick.
Yeah,
he's earned that one.
Yeah, it's and the cure is that you don't have to have this colossal department. You know, I always kind of, me personally, I look at kind of the Northeast. They have some big old kicking ass volunteer departments in the Northeast. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio. We'll throw the Rust Belt in there.
Yeah.
Rust Belt and Northeast. You guys have some phenomenal volunteer departments up there. The kicker is that you can't take a department that's been in existence from 1805 and copy their bylaws and their SOPs and say, well, this is going to work for us. Because again, you might be in Alabama. That may not work there. You may be in Texas. It don't work there. You may be in Wyoming. It's not going to work. You actually have to sit down and evaluate the specific needs and the personalities to your area. You may be an exceedingly rural volunteer department. Don't sit there and take Kent, Maryland, and sit there and say, well, that's the operation now. We're going to run off that format. What are you talking about? That's 300,000 person community. No, it's not going to work. You got to spend the time, energy, and effort into actually trying to design, engineer, and figure out what is the particular needs for your organization. Utilize the resources to you. Again, college. Maybe you're a commuting community. You can't come up with a volunteer compensation program until you actually understand what your community is.
Yeah. Needs and assets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you got anything else to throw into this thing?
Truthfully,
I think we've done a really good job with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we could ramble on for probably another 12 hours on this, but I think we've hit the core and the essence of it.
Yeah. There's always unintended consequences, and there's always 75 different scenarios, and the easy one is probably not the right answer.
Right. Last thing I'll add is if you're truly trying to kill your volunteers, go ahead and start paying them by the shift. That's a guaranteed recipe to absolutely hammer your organization because you're not prepared for it, and it's not going to work. And you're not going to understand why it doesn't work because you didn't put the time, energy, and effort into figuring out what they actually needed or what would be the benefit. So, last thoughts?
Yeah, you hit the notes.
Okay.
Let's stick a fork in it.
Call me done. All right. Always reach out to us at ittasteslikeburningcast@gmail.com. You can find us at Twitter at ITLBcast. Search for us on the subreddit ITLBcast. And you can always find us on Patreon. On Patreon, It Tastes Like Burning.
All the links are in the description.
Appreciate it.
Good night.